Riots in Dutch cities ostensibly because of coronavirus restrictions. But are they really an opportunity for extremists to push their own agendas, most notably the far right? And with the European Union already warning that Russia is spreading COVID disinformation, there are suggestions that Moscow may well be encouraging civil unrest to undermine the West. This is Roundtable. Well, hello and welcome from me, David Foster. We will be looking at what is happening in Holland, how it is dealing with COVID, and who may well be behind the street violence, both there and in other countries. Described as the worst violence to have erupted there in 4 decades, the protests in the Netherlands followed the introduction of tougher lockdown measures, including a 9 p.m. to 4:30 a.m. curfew, the first since World War II. There was unrest in at least 10 towns and cities, resulting in more than 240 arrests. Prime Minister Marc condemned the lockdown riots as criminal violence.
It is inadmissible. Any normal person can only be horrified by it. One wonders what possesses these people. It has nothing to do with protesting. It is criminal violence and we will treat it as such.
As of February the 1st, the Netherlands has had 974,775 confirmed cases of COVID-19, with 13,959 deaths. Some have argued that the riots go beyond the COVID curfew and symbolise wider distrust in the government. But marches to denounce COVID-19 lockdowns have been taking place in other countries across Europe too, including Spain, Belgium and France. As frustrations boil over, what are the main factors behind street protests in the Netherlands and other European nations? Well, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking most about Holland, but also about the bigger picture. So we go to that country, to the Netherlands, and welcome from Utrecht, Koen Vossen, political historian and lecturer at the University of Nijmegen. Then to Rotterdam, where we see Anno Bunnik, researcher at the University of Groningen and a political analyst, and in Groningen itself, Marc Esteve de Valle, assistant professor in the Department of Media and Journalism Studies at the University of Groningen. This is for each and every one of you, but I'll start with you, Anno, if I may. Are these protests, these riots, really about the pandemic?
I think we have to make sure not to conflate the recent riots that we saw last week with the demonstrations that have been going on for quite a while. I mean, these demonstrations have been going on for months, where they've collected various different people from different backgrounds have come together for various different reasons as well. And these rioters last week against the curfew measures being taken, you see that it's largely a lot of youngsters, young men, teenagers often, and we don't really know why they are rioting. Do they do this just for excitement? Because, you know, the sports is closed, the pubs are closed, you know, they got to do something in their life. Is it really that political? I doubt it. So I think that's something to keep in mind, to separate both categories.
Are there people from different camps, not necessarily those that belong to the protests themselves, using this as ammunition, trying to feed misinformation, if you like, to these protesters to try and get they're agitators, if you like?
There certainly will be. I haven't seen all the agitation, of course, because it's not always good to. So it's not always easy to follow what's going on, because it's a shady world of misinformation on Telegram channels and all kinds of spheres of influence. But we do see, that's also from both in the Netherlands and abroad, there are messages instigating what's going on in the pandemic, making all kinds of information going on that it would be just the flu. You know, the usual misinformation that we have seen about the pandemic, not just in the Netherlands, but that's a global issue, which is also a factor here in the Netherlands.
Koen, do you want to comment on who, therefore, you believe might be taking advantage of the situation, the confusion on the ground?
Well, there's one politician, Thierry Baudet, who's a national populist politician from a small political party, who is the most explicit about corona. He says that it's not more than just a flu. And he sees the lockdown really as something totalitarian. There's Geert Wilders of the Freedom Party. Well, he is a bit more concerned about the pandemic, so he's not denying the pandemic as Thierry Baudet does, but he thinks that it's too strict, that this lockdown and especially the curfew should not be necessary, and that other measures are better to deal with it. But these are two politicians, and especially Geert Wilders with the Freedom Party has about, 12-13%. Thierry Baudet about 3% of the vote. So that's about how big as it gets in the Netherlands.
And are they whipping up elements of the far right to make trouble? And I'm thinking specifically of a party which is a European transnational party called Pegida, started in Germany, anti-Muslim, but it's big in Holland as well. Are they whipping up elements of the far right, these two men that you mentioned, and others perhaps?
Well, to be sure, Pegida is not big in the Netherlands. It consists of only, a few dozen people. So it's not that big. So no, I would not say that there is some kind of international group of people being active, especially not in these riots. Of course, there's a lot of communication probably online between different groups worldwide, but there's not something like a organization that is trying to steer these riots.
Okay, well, thank you for putting me right. I suppose it's the headlines that makes me think that they're fairly influential in what's going on the streets. And if there are only a few dozen of them, well, they still could be having some kind of influence. Let me come to you, Marc, if I may, and ask you if there is misinformation out there, and if somebody's using that to try and increase the unrest, where do you believe that's coming from?
Well, I think that this comes, of course, for the search of power, right? So there are some countries, namely Russia, for instance, that since a long time have been trying to destabilize European democracy, right? So we have several examples of this spread of misinformation in order to target, as I was saying, several European Union member countries. For example, what happened in Catalonia with the Catalan referendum. Another example is the case of the Brexit in the United Kingdom.
I should point out that you are Spanish, so you are equipped to speak on what's happening in Catalonia as well.
Yes, exactly. Yes, and actually there is evidence, right? So there is academic evidence demonstrating that, for instance, this case of Catalonia, Russia used this disinformation or misinformation campaigns spread through social media to basically, promote specific ideas in favor of one specific side in this conflict. But the same happened in the case of the 2016 elections in the United States, right? So it seems to be clear that, as I was saying, so Russia is trying to destabilize politics in Western countries. And now, as the other commentator was saying, it is not at the level of the state, but it's also at the level of the parties. Well, there are some parties here in the Netherlands, especially extreme right parties, that they are trying to use also these social media channels and pick on this.
May I ask if you think they're succeeding? Are they succeeding, these outside elements, in destabilizing and influencing right-wing groups? Are they getting what they want?
I think sometimes yes, some others not. And I think that it's very difficult to evaluate what's succeeding here, right? What seems clear is that they influence. And we have the case, as I was saying, of the Catalan referendum. We have the case of the United Kingdom, the referendum, so the Brexit. And the American, so the presidential elections of 2016, and it is enough this influence to take this seriously, to evaluate how we can, fight against this interference of external powers in European elections.
Okay, let's go around the table again. I'm going to read out something from Professor Jelle van Buren, who some of you may know. He's from the University of Leiden, security expert. And he had this to say: this distrust, what we're talking about, this hate is being fueled over the years by a diversity of grievances, anger, bad experiences, motivations. And that is why it is so hard to group this phenomenon. It is really eclectic. Who wants to kick off? Let's go to you, Koen, since we started with Anno at the first part of the program. What is happening here? Is something going wrong with Dutch society? Are people feeling very marginalized and this has just made things worse, or what?
Well, I think it's hard to say, because I think this is clearly a result of a lockdown which is quite strict and which has a lot of impact on people's lives, and especially young people are locked down in their houses now for months, and so there's this need for some excitement, thrill seeking, and I think in the end that's the most important reason for these, especially these riots after the curfew. Then in Amsterdam and in Eindhoven, what you could see was various groups. So you have a small group of people who just deny the whole virus. So these are the people who believe in conspiracy theories, and there are some extreme right people who go there and think, well, if there's something is happening, well, we should be there too. Just for agitation, you could say, and there are, you could say football hooligan kind of types who just like it when there are riots going on. So it's a mixture. But to say that something is rotten in the Dutch society, well, I think we've seen this in other countries too, like Italy, and we will see this probably in other countries, because a lockdown like this, it's not surprising that something like this will happen. It has such a deep impact. So I would be surprised if nothing would happen after having such a strict lockdown.
Yeah. You're a political historian, so let me ask you to cast your mind back and try and put this into some kind of context. If we have conspiracy theories being planted in the minds of whoever these protesters, these rioters happen to be, and they then take their grievances to the streets, is this the first time such propaganda has been used this successfully, not just in Holland, but also over the years? What do you think?
Well, we are witnessing a pandemic, and we have to go back to the 1920s, to the Spanish flu. But you saw later on, you saw this squatter movement in Amsterdam, for example. There were some conspiracy theories there also about a police state and a police that killed people, and well, all these kinds of conspiracy theories were there. And there you saw also riots with the coronation of Queen Beatrix, then 1980. And these were, you could say, the biggest riots until last weekend. So, yes, conspiracy theories play a role, but I have to say that this is in that sense unique, that it's now such a huge event going on all around the world. So that's really quite new. So it's not that easy to compare it with things in the past.
Not really asking you to compare it, just to sort of, as you have done just so eloquently, state how quickly things can spread these days. And I know that's the case, isn't it? It's like a wildfire. Once a whisper gets out there, like Chinese whispers, it goes and goes and goes, and sometimes changes the narrative all the way along.
Indeed, no, yeah, we live in digital times now. So indeed, with these Telegram channels and other source of information, it's easy to spread information in little filter bubbles. This was, of course, also the case already in 2011 London riots, a decade ago, that really made the police aware of BlackBerry Messenger at the time, which was used for encrypted communication between rioters to instigate each other. So this is something we'll have to live with, and police, I think, have done fairly well here in the Netherlands to understand who are the main instigators. They even arrested some of these instigators beforehand for sharing these information, for instigating others to go riot. So I think this is a sign of our times, something we'll have to learn to live with. And I think the Dutch authorities have done fairly well in taking the sting out of the unpleasant situation so far.
Why don't we, at this moment in the program, since you're leading to where I wanted to go, which is talk about specifically the situation on the streets, what damage has been caused, etc. Why don't we listen to the mayor of Den Bosch? That's just to the southeast, I think, of Rotterdam.
Ik krijg hier kippenvel van.
It gives me goosebumps to see you all here. Yesterday was a painful night for all of us. Painful because we saw how this beautiful town we are all so proud of being destroyed by a number of rioters, looters and thieves. Despite the situation where we have been told to hold on to each other and to fight the virus together. And after entering the city here, a number of them even visited the Urenbosch hospital to scare the medical workers. It hurts. It hurts for all of us.
And he calls them rioters, looters, thieves, but if they're going to somewhere like the local hospital and he says scaring staff there, is there more to it than just that?
Well, I don't want to make it bigger than it is. That can be one incident where a couple of people indeed in the haze of the excitement, thinking where do we go next? All kinds of random stores have been plundered. There is not much of an agenda, I think, in the selection of targets, which buildings have been attacked. This was really a small outburst of violence for a couple of days, quite intense, of course, and quite violent. So I think we definitely have to take this serious, but I don't want to make it into anything bigger than it really is, because these are mainly young people. Many of them were even teenagers, 17, 18, 19 years old. So we don't really know why they've done this. Was it simply for some excitement in their life? I can imagine growing up in these times, it must be quite tough to miss a large part of your childhood growing up. So, yeah.
Which one of you was it? It may well have been you, Marc, correct me if I'm wrong, that said that this was almost like gaming for some of them. Was that you, Marc, or was that somebody else?
I mentioned that, yeah. It was gaming.
What do you mean?
And I mean that, these protests, they were actually live streamed by some of the people participating in the riot, right? So what is happening here is that we have, let's say, disruption of the media ecosystem. We have the mass media that largely covered by mass media. I mean, televisions and newspapers and radio. They largely covered these riots and these extraordinary times of the pandemic. I see these riots as a consequence of the anger and frustration, mainly in young people, and then we have a second media system that is coexisting with this mass media system, which is the new media system, right? And by this new media system, I mean social networking sites like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and so on and so forth. And so on the first media system, mass media, we have mainly older cohorts of population, whereas on this second media system, in new media, we have young cohorts of population that they are politically participating in these riots in a completely different way. And by gaming, I mean that they are live streaming, they are participating in these riots, and they even ask via their followers on these social media platforms, do this and do that, right? So this is a huge.
So you're saying that they're asking their followers to tell them what to do next in the middle of a riot?
Exactly. So they ask to the followers. Of course, what I'm saying here is that this is not all the people protesting, and this is not happening in all the riots, but some of them, and this has been shown already. Some of them, they are doing so, right? And this is like a disruption in the way how people are politically participated in this case protest in political event, right? Yeah.
Well, it
So
most
it's very
certainly
difficult.
is a changing world. It is. I'm going to have to move it on just a little bit, Marc, if I may, and I'm going to go to Koen with this one. And this is for all of you as well, but Koen first of all. Is there some anger in the Netherlands about the fact that, I noticed all of you said the government had handled the pandemic situation relatively well, but anger perhaps now that Holland is way, way, way down the list of those countries successfully administering a vaccine. Now, I looked at a list the other day, and of European countries, it was in 26th place. And we know that the European response hasn't been that fast anyway. Is there anger about that?
Yes, I think there is. The Dutch are always very proud that we're always in the top 5 when it comes to all these kinds of things. And we laugh about countries in the south of Europe or in the east of Europe where they are a bit slower and they're not that well organized as in the Netherlands. So it's almost a kind of humiliation that we are so slow now. And there's so much about this in the press too. So I think, you're correct there. So there is some feeling of shame. We also had a huge scandal with regard to child benefit care. And the government stepped down because of it. So these were not the best times for Dutch politics the last 2 months, so to speak. So
taking off your professional hat and just wearing a Dutch one, and this would be the same for you, Anno, as well. What do you personally feel about the fact that Holland seems to be so far down the chain when it comes to successful vaccinations?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with what Koen just said. Normally with innovation rankings, with the technology index, all these world rankings that you have, we always score relatively high. So it is quite sad that our system, the way it's been used with the decentralized healthcare system, etc., doesn't really seem equipped to deal with the pandemic and with the delivery of the vaccines. So this remains very much a political issue. And I guess we're missing a bit of logistical capacity. We should have had maybe perhaps some of the military involved in the distribution of the vaccines. So yeah, it is. I agree with Koen. It is quite sad that we're running behind. At the same time, I think the government doesn't really won't be really punished for it in the elections in March because there is not really an alternative.
Okay, so it will stay pretty much the same despite all the destabilizing factors. Marc, have you got any thoughts on whether this kind of dissatisfaction is going to go away in Holland?
Well, what seems to be clear is that this anger and dissatisfaction cannot be translated in a different voting intention because what we see is that there has been an increase actually in the voting intention for the party of the Prime Minister, Marc Rutte. Actually, the voting intention for the party in March was around 14%, and today it's around 28%. So what we see is that it seems as if the Dutch population is in search of need of security, normal in this pandemic period where there is a lot of fear. And actually, this is something that is happening in other European countries, right? So there is as I was saying, in this search of stability, what people seems to be doing is to rely on the government that they have. Now let's gonna see what happens after the elections, and this will depend very much on the economic situation, on the new probably coalition government that's going to be here in the Netherlands, and I would say also on the way how this pandemic is going to be solved.
Thank you. Okay, look, Koen, just wrap this up for us. Would you say dissatisfaction, but not a lot achieved on the streets, not a long-term movement, but there have been outside influences, and we're going to see more of it, if not in terms of violence, but in terms of just trying to influence what's going on?
Yeah, there's not a real political translation in the sense that there is some kind of mass mobilization. With Marc Rutte, we have a prime minister that in many ways resembles Ronald Reagan in the past. So he's the great communicator, always seems to be shiny and happy, and a Teflon prime minister, they often call him. So in that sense, the rally around the flag here in the Netherlands will I think will take place until the elections in March 2021.
Okay, well, listen, thank you, each and every one of you. It's very good to hear from you on this round table, throwing some light on the reasons behind what we've seen on the front pages of our newspapers and those who might be benefiting from promoting such unrest upon the streets of the Netherlands. Listen, thanks for taking part in the programme. And wherever you happen to be watching this edition of Roundtable, many thanks to you for taking the time and the trouble to do so. We hope to have your company on another occasion. You can always find us, do some catching up on our YouTube channel. That's Roundtable, TRT World on YouTube. From me, David Foster, for now, and from our team, goodbye.